In a small city in Maryland, wedged between ordinary office buildings where people park their cars and eat their lunch, there is a steel ball 4 stories tall. It weighs 131 tons. Its walls are a full inch of solid steel. It was built starting in the late 1940s. It carries an official plaque, and it has been a protected site on the National Register of Historic Places since 1977. To almost everyone who passes it, if they notice it at all, it is an old tank. Something industrial and forgotten, the kind of thing your eyes slide off. The director of the County Visitors Center once said, on the record, that in all his time there not one person had ever stopped in to ask about it, and that he doubted most local residents even knew it was there. It is the largest chamber of its kind ever constructed anywhere on Earth. It was built by the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, and its purpose was to study, with precision, exactly how a human being breathes in disease. The soldiers who worked there did not call it by its official name, the 1 million liter test sphere. They called it the 8 ball. Inside that sphere, in the 1950s and 60s, more than 2,000 American soldiers volunteered to breathe air that the Army had deliberately filled with live disease. They were not prisoners, and they were not tricked. Most of them were in uniform for religious reasons, and the question of why they said yes is one of the strangest and most genuinely difficult stories of the entire Cold War. We will come back to them. To understand why an object like this exists, you have to go back to the middle of the Second World War. In 1943, the United States established a biological warfare research program at Camp Detrick in Frederick, Maryland. The framing was defensive, and the fact was offensive. Germany and Japan were both believed to be pursuing biological weapons, and the American government decided it needed both a shield against them and, if it came to that, a sword of its own. For the next 26 years, Camp Detrick, later Fort Detrick, was the center of America's offensive biological weapons work. The 8 ball was built to solve a specific problem. In the early years, testing biological agents meant hauling them out to remote sites, places like Dugway Proving Ground in the Utah desert, a site with its own dark history, and Horn Island off the coast of Mississippi. That was slow, it was exposed, and it was dangerous. A division head at Detrick named Herbert Tanner imagined something different. He wanted a sealed, controlled environment right on site, where the behavior of an infectious cloud could be studied safely inside a container strong enough to survive an explosion. That container became the 8 ball. Its inch-thick hull was engineered so that a biological munition could actually be detonated inside it without anything reaching the outside world. The scale of it was extraordinary. 4 stories tall, 1 million liters of enclosed volume. A sphere so large it was originally built inside its own brick building. Scientists worked at control panels around its base, reaching into the sealed inner chamber through built-in rubber gloves, and then used instruments fixed into the walls to measure how a released cloud moved, how fast it traveled, how it spread, how long it stayed suspended in the air. And here is where the story has to stay honest, because the 8 ball had 2 faces at once. It served the offensive program, studying how agents dispersed. But it also served the defensive program, and that is not a minor detail added for comfort. The very same chamber was central to developing vaccines and protective measures against the weapons other nations might build. It was, at the same moment, a weapons instrument and a medical one. Pretending it was only the first would be as dishonest as pretending it was only the second. None of this is contested fringe history, and it is worth pausing on that because it is what separates this from rumor. The sphere's function is described in the National Register nomination itself. It is described in the Army's own institutional histories. It is described in the extensive records the Seventh-day Adventist Church has kept of its own members' involvement, and in decades of local reporting by the Frederick News Post. The military, the church, and the local press do not agree about much by instinct, and they all describe the same object doing the same things. Which brings us to the part that still divides ethicists today. To learn how to protect a soldier from an airborne disease, you first have to understand exactly what that disease does to a person who breathes it in. And the Army concluded that the only way to truly know that was to find people who were willing to walk up to the 8-ball and inhale. The science at the heart of this is called aerobiology, the study of how living infectious particles behave while suspended in air. The crucial variable is the one that makes airborne disease uniquely frightening. It is the difference between a dose that lands on your skin, where it may do nothing at all, and a dose you draw down into your lungs. To build real defenses, researchers needed to understand infectious clouds as physical objects, how they formed, how long they lingered, how deep into the lungs a particle of a given size would actually reach. The 8-ball was the instrument that turned those invisible questions into measurable ones. This is where the abstract became specific. Tethered animals were placed into the chamber through sealed ports to study the effects of exposure. And through those same ports, spaced around the perimeter of the sphere, human volunteers breathed carefully measured, metered amounts of specific organisms. Most notably, the agents that cause Q fever and tularemia, two diseases chosen in part precisely because they reliably make people sick, but only rarely kill them. The program that sent those volunteers to the sphere was called Operation Whitecoat, and it is a genuinely hard story that deserves to be told in full, rather than flattened in either direction. From 1954 to 1973, the Army ran Whitecoat with a stated defensive purpose: to test vaccines and treatments by exposing consenting humans to real agents under close medical supervision. To do that, it needed volunteers, and it found them in an unusual place. There were roughly 2,300 of them, overwhelmingly members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. These men were conscientious objectors. Their faith forbade them to carry a weapon, but many of them still wanted to serve their country in a time of war. The Army offered them a path to do exactly that without a rifle, by volunteering their own bodies for medical research instead. And there is a revealing detail in how this came about. Earlier in the program, ordinary enlisted men had been used until they staged a sit-down protest demanding more information about the risks they were being asked to take. The Adventists who replaced them were, by the church's own account, thoroughly briefed on what they were agreeing to. The ethics of this are not something I am going to resolve for you, because they do not resolve cleanly. Weigh both sides. On one side, the protections were, for their era, genuinely advanced. Volunteers were briefed on the specific purpose and the specific risks of each study under a consent process modeled on the Nuremberg Code, the standard written after the Second World War, precisely to prevent abusive human experimentation. They were free to refuse, and about 1 in 5 of them did decline after being briefed. No Whitecoat is recorded as having died as a result of the experiments. And the program is credited with contributing to vaccines that are still in use today. USAMRIID, the institute that Detrick eventually became, has described Whitecoat as a model for the ethical use of human subjects. On the other side stand complications that are just as real. These were soldiers being asked by their own military, and in effect encouraged by their own church, which raises a genuine question about how freely a man can say no when both of those hierarchies are arranged around him saying yes. The follow-up was poor. The Army kept current addresses for only about 1,000 of the 2,300 participants. Only around 500 were ever surveyed afterward, and the military declined to fund the blood testing that might have answered lingering questions about long-term effects. A handful of participants have reported ongoing health problems, and the studies themselves noted possible statistical associations with asthma and with headaches, while judging their own sample sizes too small to confirm them. The point of laying all this out is not to hand down a verdict. It is that a reasonable person can hold deep admiration for these men and real unease about the arrangement they were placed in at the very same time, and be right on both counts. And whatever you conclude about the ethics, the knowledge itself came out real, and it came out permanently double-edged. The same understanding of infectious aerosols that can be turned into a weapon is the understanding that underpins modern vaccine development, hospital infection control, and clean room design. You cannot learn to defend against airborne disease without learning how airborne disease actually works. That knowledge, once you have it, does not carry a loyalty. It simply tells you how the world is, and then leaves you to decide what to do with it. In 1969, President Nixon ended the American Offensive Biological Weapons Program by executive order. The offensive agents were destroyed and the 8-ball fell silent. And here is the quietly remarkable thing. The sphere was not torn down. It was left standing. 8 years later, the United States government formally added it to the National Register of Historic Places. The nation chose to preserve it. It simply never quite got around to telling anyone what it was. That points to something you can actually do, and to a skill worth carrying beyond this one story. Learning to notice when an official, sanitized historical label is sitting on top of something much larger, written in language so flat that nobody bothers to read it. The National Register of Historic Places is a public, searchable federal database. The 8-ball is listed in it under reference number 770000696, added on the 23rd of November, 1977. Anyone with an internet connection can pull that listing. And the lesson in it is that a landmark plaque is itself a primary source. Reading the actual nomination document, rather than the 3 words on the sign, is where the real description has been sitting the entire time. The same goes for the institution. USAMRIID has published its own histories, and the Army's own accounts describe the offensive program, its end in 1969, and Operation Whitecoat directly. Primary institutional history, written by the organization itself, is almost always more reliable than a second-hand retelling of it. And Whitecoat in particular is a case study in how to verify a difficult claim, because it is documented from directions that do not usually align. There is the Army's version. There is the Seventh-day Adventist Church's version. And there are independent academic and journalistic accounts. Read them against one another. When adversarial and friendly sources agree on the core facts, you can trust the core facts. When they diverge, the divergence is itself information about where the pressure lies. So here is the reframe, and it is the genuinely useful habit to take from all of this. The 8-ball was never hidden. It has a plaque. It sits on a federal register. Its function is written down in public documents that anyone can read. What conceals it is not secrecy. It is the assumption that a thing with an official historical designation must therefore be safe and settled and boring. The most effective way to hide something in plain sight in America is not to classify it. It is to bolt a small bronze plaque onto it and let people's eyes slide past. The 8-ball was protected by something more reliable than any fence, the widespread assumption that it is not worth asking about, which leads straight to the mistake almost everyone makes about a place like Fort Detrick. People assume the important questions are all in the past tense. What happened there during the Cold War, safely behind glass decades ago? But Fort Detrick is not a museum. It is one of a very small number of places on the continent still working today with the most dangerous pathogens on Earth. And the most revealing thing to happen there recently is not from the 1960s at all. Detrick never became history. When Nixon ended the offensive program in 1969, the site pivoted to defense, and the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRIID, was established there. Today, Fort Detrick hosts one of the small handful of maximum containment laboratories in North America, the level known as BSL-4, where researchers work with agents like Ebola and the organisms that cause plague and tularemia. That last one is worth sitting with. Tularemia is the same disease studied inside the 8-ball 70 years ago. The stated purpose changed. The science never stopped. And in July of 2019, that science ran into a wall. The CDC ordered USAMRIID to halt its high containment work. This is real and it is documented. According to the CDC and the Army's own statements, the reasons were a failure of the wastewater decontamination system, after a flood in 2018 damaged the plant that sterilized it, combined with lapses in procedure and training. Some records were redacted citing national security, which is routine for a facility like this, and also, predictably, an engraved invitation to speculation. The labs ran at reduced capacity and were cleared to return to full operation in March of 2020. Now, because that shutdown happened just months before COVID-19 became public knowledge, a claim spread, promoted heavily by Chinese state media, that the pandemic had actually originated at Fort Detrick. I'm going to be direct about this because the honest answer matters more than the dramatic one. That claim is not supported by the evidence. The genomic study conducted by the Scripps Research Institute found that the virus arose naturally and was not engineered in any laboratory. USAMRIID stated that nothing had escaped authorized containment. The documented cause of the shutdown was infrastructure and procedure, not the release of some novel virus. But the real lesson in that episode is the interesting one, and it is a lesson about how information works. A genuine, verifiable, thoroughly mundane safety failure became the seed for a sweeping global claim it never actually supported. And it did so precisely because Fort Detrick's real history makes people willing to believe almost anything about it. The reputation did the work the evidence could not. When a place has actually built biological weapons, actually run human exposure experiments, and actually kept the steel sphere as a monument, the public imagination will happily fill any gap you leave open. Which is exactly why staying on the documented record matters most at the sites where it is hardest to do. So, what is Fort Detrick hiding that nobody talks about? Not a leaked virus, not a secret weapon behind a fence. What almost nobody talks about is the ordinary, on-the-record truth, and it is stranger than any conspiracy. That the United States ran an offensive biological weapons program for 26 years. That it asked its own soldiers to breathe live disease inside a steel ball in order to build defenses against it. That it kept the last and largest of those spheres standing as an official national monument. And that it works with those same families of pathogens on that same patch of Maryland ground today. None of that is secret. All of it is verifiable. And the County Visitors Center says that nobody has ever once come in to ask. The real secret of Fort Detrick was never a hidden thing behind a fence. It is a very large thing in plain sight that the country decided to preserve, to designate, and then simply never to explain, because a monument that nobody understands keeps its meaning far better than one locked away. Come back then to the person who drives past the 8-ball and sees an old tank. They are not failing to pay attention. They are seeing exactly what a bronze plaque and a federal designation are built to produce, which is the feeling that a thing has been handled, cataloged, and rendered safe to ignore. But the 8-ball is not safe to ignore. It is one of the most honest objects in the country, a 4-story steel confession that America built these weapons, tested them on willing men, and then chose to leave the evidence standing in the open air. They called it the 8-ball because it looked like one. A big, dark, almost playful sphere. And the nickname turned out to be the perfect disguise, because nothing that shares its name with a bar game reads as a place where soldiers once lined up to breathe in disease for their country. The name did the same work the plaque did. It made something grave look like nothing at all. You do not have to travel to Maryland to see this for yourself. Open the National Register of Historic Places, search the reference number 7700696, and read the official listing. It is a few paragraphs of calm, bureaucratic prose describing a 1 million-liter chamber built to study biological weapons, sitting on a federal list between old courthouses and covered bridges and country churches. Read it, and notice how utterly ordinary it manages to sound. That flatness is the entire point. The most unsettling things in a nation's history are rarely the ones as it hides. They are the ones it writes down plainly, files correctly, and quietly trusts that you will never look up. And if this is the thing that stays with you, that the most dangerous secrets are the ones kept in plain sight, then there is one more place you should see. Because a few hundred miles south of that steel sphere, underneath a 5-star resort where guests played golf and sipped cocktails, the government hid an entire relocation bunker for the United States Congress, in plain view, for 30 years. Same trick, different disguise. That story is where to go next.